And we are rolling. Hi, everyone. This is Mark Goldberg with UN Dispatch. I'm the editor of UN Dispatch, and I am so pleased and honored to be moderating the kickoff panel to the kickoff day of Action 2015. We have an excellent panel to help frame today's discussion, but also this year's discussion. We are about to enter a supremely and profoundly consequential year for humanity. 2015 is the year that the Millennium Development Goals expired, and they will be replaced by the Sustainable Development Goals. From now until September, at the United Nations Summit in New York, the international community, diplomats, delegates, and civil society are going to be deciding what precisely those Sustainable Development Goals should be. 6 weeks after that is the Paris climate talks. This is probably the last best chance for the international community to come together around a binding international climate change agreement. So these are two huge inflection points all happening in 1 year, and the outcome of both these events will affect most of the 7 billion people on the planet. This is a profoundly important and consequential year for humanity, and I am honored to lead and moderate the kickoff session to discuss what I think is probably the biggest NGO coalition ever, coalescing around making sure that our ambitions for both of these events are high and match the needs in the world today. So joining with me in this kickoff session is Rod Skinner from the United Nations Foundation, Lori Moskowitz from the One Campaign, and Marie Lostis from the Action 2015 NGO Coalition. So this is three different and distinct perspectives all coming together on this one issue to help frame this issue and set into motion this day of social media action and this year of real-world action on the most important challenges facing humanity. So to kick it off, I wanted to turn to Marie to explain what is Action 2015. Why have you come together? Who are you, and what do you hope to accomplish over the course of the year?
Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone, and thanks very much, really, for receiving us today. It's an exciting day for us. We are kicking off our campaign, as you said. Over 1,000 organizations have come together to date, with moral leaders, celebrities, and activists around the world, such as Malala, Desmond Tutu, Ben Affleck, to name just a few. All of them have come together to launch Action 2015, which is, as you said, one of the biggest campaigns ever launched, demanding action to tackle poverty, climate change, and inequality. So the campaign has formed because 2015, as you said, is probably one of the most important years we've seen in decades to change the future for all people and the planet. Almost 1 billion people could face a life of extreme poverty if leaders took the key decisions they could take next year on poverty, inequality, and climate change. So to really make sure that we get the change that we need for the people, for the future generations, and for the planet, we have to put pressure. We have to come together, raise our voices, and be as loud as we can. So they hear us, and they really take those very needed and ambitious agreements we need next year. So what's happening? As I've said, 1,000 member organizations so far, coming from all over the world, from over 125 countries. From Save the Children to Islamic Relief, from online campaign groups like VAZ to grassroots groups like the Dalit organizations in India, climate groups like the People's Alliance for Climate Justice. It's one of the biggest campaigns, everybody coming together to make sure that we gather all those very important topics, from climate development to human rights to poverty, everything together to make sure that nothing is forgotten, that we leave no one behind, and work together next year. So today is the launch of our campaign, and we've managed to gather many activists around the world, celebrities like Desmond Tutu, Malala, who have all signed an open letter asking ambitious action from our leaders. Young activists around the world are showing their movement with activities in over 50 countries. So lots of exciting stuff, and we're happy to talk about it.
Can you just talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how you're working together? I mean, this is, as far as I can tell, an unprecedented coalition, both in terms of the numbers of people, but also the diversity of groups that are involved. I mean, you have human rights groups and environmental groups and development groups. How are you actually working together?
So we are working together, you're right. A diverse group in terms of size, shape, and themes we work on. The way we work together, that we gather around big moments that we believe are very important, very key to help us move forward for next year. So we have gathered today for the launch of our campaign, and we will gather at other key moments during the year. In May, ahead of the summit. In July, just before the Friendship and Development Summit, that we will talk more about later on. We will gather again in September and December to make sure that we put pressure till the end. So this is how we are going to do it. We are going to work and mobilize people around the world who will organize stunts, go and deliver petitions to their leaders, gather youth to make sure that their voices, because they will be the ones most affected by the decision that will be taken next year. We're gathering all the stakeholders, informing them about the importance of next year, inspiring them for the change that can happen, because very often we feel that change can't happen. But this year it can. So we're mobilizing people, making them understand that we can do it. All together, we can make change happen.
Before I turn to Rob, I want to let you all know that I'm taking questions on Twitter, and I'll read your questions to the panel and ask the panel your questions. Hit me up at Mark L. Goldberg and use the hashtag Action2015, and I will pose your questions to the panel. So, Rob, I wanted to see if you could give something of a UN perspective on what this process in 2015 will look like. How will 2015 unfold inside the UN and sort of the sort of halls of the UN and from the perspective of diplomats who are part of this, amazing agenda setting?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for moderating the session. And it's great to be here with Marie and Lori, and really be part of this amazing coalition of organizations. I mean, as Marie discussed, well over 1,000 organizations now from over 125 countries. It's amazing to be part of it. And it's incredible what we're already seeing. I mean, this is the kickoff of the digital surge here in sort of the North American time zone, but we've been getting all kinds of incredible inputs from around the world. Where the 15th is well overway, and in Marie's time zone, almost over already, in fact. But it's been great to see that all come in. The excitement that's being generated around this is, as you said, Mark, I think this really is an unprecedented effort to bring a diverse set of organizations together, from the climate organizations, the development organizations, the rights organizations, all pulling in the same direction throughout the year of 2015, and really, the way I think of it, it'll be 2015 and then keep going past 2015 when we have to push governments to keep implementing. But to your question directly, Mark, on the United Nations, I mean, you laid it out quite well in the opening that this is an incredible year to have the new set of development goals being negotiated and culminating in a summit here in New York in September, and then having a critical year on the climate agenda with the governments having agreed to achieve a climate agreement by the end of 2015, and we'll make that happen in Paris in December. So with those two coming together, and then the third, which Maria also referenced, an important session on financing, which is always a question, how are we going to pay for this, and what kind of creative ways can we determine to keep financing to be able to achieve the goals we're going to set on development and on climate, and make sure that all stakeholders that are involved will step up to the plate, to use a U.S. baseball reference, and do what they've indicated they're going to do. So, I mean, at the UN, starting on Monday, actually, governments will be beginning the negotiating process to the September SDG, or Sustainable Development Goals Summit, which are the goals that will be put in place to to work on the big issues: poverty, inequality, climate. And all the issues that sort of fall under there from 2015 to 2030. So it's an intense diplomatic schedule here in New York, but in other places as well on the SDGs, and it's also an intense diplomatic year on the climate to reach an agreement on climate, and that's taking place in various locations around the world, with the center of those negotiations in Bonn, Germany, under a UN organization that manages the climate treaty. So. So that's sort of the inside the corridors UN situation. But what's interesting and what's happening is how much the UN is actually engaging with civil society and with other stakeholders to help make sure that this happens, and including the fact that the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon couldn't participate live today because he's traveling and not available to participate. He actually is, I think, in a plane right now as I speak, or maybe has landed somewhere in the world. But so he decided if he couldn't participate live, he wanted to shoot a video. So he worked with Action 2015 to bring in a group of young people to shoot an excellent video, messaging video, that links the UN's own campaign for 2015, which is called 2015, A Time for Global Action, which links very nicely to Action 2015. And and the UN community has really said, okay, we need civil society, we need citizens of the world to help us achieve what we need to achieve, because we're on the same page. We're all working together. We all want these things to happen, and the governments or the member states of the UN need to push and come together, because it's really in their hands to negotiate these documents now. So that's in their hands, but to make it all happen, we need citizens and civil society organizations around the world to work together, and that's really what Action 2015 is about, making it happen in terms of getting good, solid, ambitious, meaningful agreements, but then making sure that we all continue to work together to make sure that those get implemented and action is really taken.
Now, Rob, you've been around the United Nations for a long time, and you're a former U.S. diplomat. I know you've been working with the United Nations Foundation for a long time. I mean, have you seen this level of cooperation between civil society and officials at the United Nations, the Secretary General or others before? I mean, I'm remembering back in September, Ban Ki-moon even participated in the People's Climate March. So there seems to be like this really kind of a symbiotic relationship that seems to be taking at least the UN Secretariat staff and civil society. Is there precedent for this? I can't think of any, but I'm wondering if you can.
I think there's been solid interaction, but I think that this Secretary General has welcomed the inputs of civil society, and I also give a lot of credit to the governments in this process. I mean, I think that there has been an effort to get civil society inputs into the process in a meaningful way. It's not always easy. I mean, some governments are more welcoming to that than others, of course. But there has been this sense that civil society needs to be in the room, has a place at the table, and not only did the Secretary General participate in the Climate March, which was an incredible event around the summit that he called for in New York last September. When you put when 400,000 people or more arrive in the streets of New York City, it has an impact, as well as the large numbers of organizations that put together events globally on that same day. I mean, it sends a message to the governments that this matters. This is important. People care about this. People want action, and I think that's been heard. Partly because there's a recognition that development assistance and to lift people out of poverty and to get real action on climate change and to fix the inequalities that exist in all our societies. It needs people, and it needs the government to listen to their people. And so when you turn out numbers like that, and when you see organizations coming together under a banner like Action 2015, there's not a great option. Now you have to say, okay, we have to listen to the people that make up those organizations and let them be a part of it, because it's meaningful. And I think you'll see. I mean, I know that the U.S. State Department put out a statement on Action 2015 today. So the U.S. government is certainly taking notice. The 15-year-olds around the world working with the Action 2015 organizations are meeting with global leaders from Tanzania to Benin to India. So there are governments that are definitely saying, okay, Action 2015 is going to have an impact. We should probably get on board with the launch and be a part of it, from the beginning and through the year.
Thank you. So I wanted to turn now to Lori Moskowitz from the One campaign. So, Lori, we don't know the precise contours of the SDGs yet, but we do have some strong indications that, as opposed to the Millennium Development Goals, which preceded them, the Sustainable Development Goals place some amount of responsibility on the wealthier countries, on the developed world. I wanted to get your perspective, an American perspective, on what your advocacy campaign looks like vis-a-vis the U.S. government and wealthier Western donors and their role to play in this whole process.
Sure, thanks, and thanks for moderating, Mark, and happy to be here today doing this. What are our goals regarding advocacy? When we started thinking about sort of the next round of Sustainable Development Goals, and what we want out of this, I think we really think about three specific things. Number one is not just that there's good goals, but these goals are ambitious. And I think that really relates back to sort of the Action 2015 movement, because we really want more overall out of these goals. Since the last round and since 1990, I think we've almost halved the number of people in poverty, but there's still so much more to go. And so we want to make sure that in 15 years, we're not having this same conversation. And so for us, that means getting to the most vulnerable and the hardest to reach. And so, women and girls in particular factor into that, and people who live in rural communities and urban slums. And those are really, really important goals because, that's the hardest work to do. And so for us, that's an important, ambitious goal out of these goals, not just to see that we have sort of in writing something that says we're going to get to the end, but how do you do it? The second piece, and Rob alluded to this, is the financing, and this Financing for Development Summit that'll happen in July. But the goals need to be financed, and I think one really important point when you think about Western donors are important. And the U.S. government's contribution is critically important, and as as sort of our mission, we sort of campaign to the U.S. government to make sure they make an adequate commitment. But we also think it's equally important that these countries make commitments as well. And so, for example, in Africa last year, one worked with the African Union and to run a campaign where each of the governments there were committing a higher percentage of their budget to, for example, agriculture. And so that's really important too, that it's not just Western donors or wealthy nations participating, but that the countries themselves commit to solve these problems, and then it's a collaborative effort. And then finally, at the end of the day, these goals need to be tracked and monitored, and there needs to be transparency and accountability. If people don't know where the money's going, it's hard to hold leaders accountable for it. And so we want those three pieces to be critical, important pieces of our advocacy in this whole equation. And I think, last night I was with a group of 30 15-year-olds who are going to the State Department this morning to express exactly that, and they're very cognizant that in 15 years they are the new global leaders, and, they don't want to have to repeat this conversation. So, that's why we joined it and, joined up with Action 2015 to help make these goals reality.
Lori, I wanted to ask you a question I think gets to the heart of a lot of the discussions that we're having around the Sustainable Development Goals. So far, it's probably going to be the case that the top SDG, the top Sustainable Development Goal, will be to totally eradicate global extreme poverty as measured by people living on less than $1.25 a day by 2030. This sounds like crazily audacious to me. Is it plausible to you, and how do you communicate the plausibility of that goal to an American audience?
It's a great question, Mark. I mean, how do you communicate? It's a really big number that is not very tangible to many people. And so what we like to talk about is the programs that help people, because I think that's a much more, people have an affinity towards that, right? So, making sure that children under 5 don't die from a preventable disease, is really, really important, and people understand that. Making sure that people get support for agriculture and for doing more than just subsistence living, but actually, making a livelihood out of farming. Again, back to our campaign called Do a Greek last year in Africa, we were working with African artists to make farming cool. But doing it through music and pop culture, We were on the show Big Brother, which is a highly popular show in Africa. We had one of the best-selling songs of the year with collaborative African artists. That's how you make this tangible to people. I think if you talk about those big giant numbers that don't really mean something specifically to people, that's harder. I think you have to do it through what relates to people. And we do that through pop culture here in America. As well, through music, through videos. We have a great video out today, which I think is sort of being tweeted out, and you can find on the one.org site and on the Action2015 YouTube channel in 6 different languages. But these are the things that make people understand what this means, not the big giant numbers.
So Marie, we got a question over Twitter that I think is best put to you. Bjorn Schwarzenbach asks, how can #youth contribute to a sustainable development and push leaders for more inclusive policy making? And I wanted to piggyback on Bjorn's question and ask you about this group of 15-year-olds. So you and Lori and Rob have all mentioned that there is, I guess, a group of 15-year-olds that are traveling the world, or perhaps from each country around the world, pressuring their leaders. Can you talk a bit about the role of youth, and also specifically this 15-year-old cohort that you have mentioned so far?
Yes, and it's though I'm sure that many of them would love to travel around the world. It's actually many delegations of 15-year-olds around the world that have been formed. All of them were born in the year 2000, just around the millennium, at the beginning of the Millennium Development Goals. They are now 15-year-olds. Just when we're about to kickstart with the Sustainable Development Goals, they will be 30, they will be adults once that's gone. So all these youngsters know that these goals will matter to them. It is when they will enter adulthood, the job market, they have to make a difference now. So they have gathered in over 50 countries today to make sure that they would build pressure on their leaders. They've done so in many different ways. Some are currently meeting with our presidents, prime ministers, members of parliaments. As Rob mentioned, some of them met with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon a couple of days ago to make sure that all leaders understand their concerns and will take them seriously. So that was done today. We will repeat it over the year. Really, this is the future generation. We need to listen to them. So through Action 2015, we will be mobilizing youth, helping them to ensure that their voices are heard for our future, to all of us.
And Marie, this is a question I'll put to the other two, but I'll put you on the spot first. So, the 15-year-olds that you mentioned, they'll be 30 in 2030. What will the world look like if an ambitious agenda is maintained in 2030? How will the world as we know it today be different 15 years from now if the Sustainable Development Goals are ambitious and implemented, and if the Paris climate talks yield a successful outcome?
That's a great question. And basically, you're asking, why are you doing that? So we are doing this because we really believe that in 2030, if we are ambitious enough, we can put an end to poverty. Really, an end to poverty in all its forms, and ensure that a development and economic system will benefit everyone. We believe that we can put an end to soaring levels of inequalities and discrimination, that we can ensure that everyone's fundamental rights are met. This is what we believe in, and we believe something very important to all of us, that we can accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy. All that matters to us. We want a world where everyone can participate and where everyone feels free to hold their leaders accountable. That's why we're gathering today, and that's why we're hoping to achieve in 2030.
And Rob, how will the United Nations change, or perhaps not change, if by 2030 global poverty is eradicated and fossil fuels only make up a marginal percentage of the international sort of energy market?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and I thought Marie did a great job, taking on that question. Is she got to hit on it first? But I mean, I think if you talk to individuals around the UN, I mean, a lot of the UN organizations and deal with helping to tackle these problems. The UN Development Program, working on lifting people out of poverty around the world. UNICEF working with children. The UN Environmental Program, working on climate and environment issues, obviously. And I think if you talk to the UN staff that are in there that really care about these issues, they say that they'd like nothing more than to be put out of business. They would love to have enough progress on all of these issues and all of these matters that we don't need to have big organizations working on them, and that the countries and citizens are taking them on themselves and managing to lift people out of poverty, give people equal opportunity, and have equal rights to be able to do that. And that we'll be living in a planet where you're seeing 100% renewable energy or close to 100% renewable energy being used. So we're keeping the planet livable. And all this is achievable. I mean, I think that we keep talking about ambitious goals, and yes, they are ambitious, but they're also realistic. I mean, these goals, these ambitious goals implemented, a climate agreement reached. It can be done. This is possible. We have the technology. We have the ability to communicate with each other. We have the ability to, work together in unprecedented ways on a global scale. We can share information. We can share technologies because we have technologies that allow us to do that. And so it's not really just saying, oh, we're adopting ambitious goals. Yes, they are ambitious, but they are achievable. We can do this, and that's why we're not telling people to join Action 2015. Because we're going to, try and achieve something that can't be done. It's something that actually can be done, and we want, organizations and people to be a part of that. So that's really, to me, what Action 2015 is about: is getting to a place where we can get.
And Lori, so I mean, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, and tell me if I'm wrong, but the next 15 years, if this agenda is ambitious, and if leaders' feet are held to the fire, the changes in the world, the reduction of extreme poverty and the reduction of the harmful consequences of climate change will probably be most acutely felt by people in the developing world, by most of the 7 billion people on the planet. How will Americans, do you think, experience these changes over the next 15 years?
Sure. I think it's hard to say exactly how Americans will specifically experience it, but I do think that we see today that the world is much more global. One in particular does a lot of work on college campuses, and you see today, those 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds, they are much more global in their approach to the world. They're connected via Skype and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and so many things that connect them, and they meet somebody, and they travel, and so they feel much more connected. And I think as, specifically on the eradication of poverty, what it does is makes Africa, and Latin America and other places, India, places that have not had nearly as sort of thriving economies because of the, because of the poverty that's there. These are places that are going to be much more involved in global economics and global trade. Jobs being, sort of on the rise there. I think you'll see a much greater interaction on things that, people in the U.S. are used to every day. Africa is the fastest growing economy in the world right now. And so I think, that's how Americans will start to experience, hopefully, more travel, more interaction on the business front, on the entertainment front, on the pop culture front. All of those things, I think, are going to be the benefit. And specifically, on the U.S. front, I mean, one is one of those organizations, with our work on poverty, we'd love to be put out of business. We're not here to exist forever either, as Rob said about the UN. Our mission is to, make sure that, the U.S. invests in smart strategic programs, and we'd much rather have trading partners, than trying to ship food over to places that, should and have the ability to grow it themselves. So, That's how I think people will experience it, and we think that's the most viable way to go about it.
So we have just about a minute left, and this is a day of action. This is the kickoff session to a day of action. So I want to ask each of you, how can people get involved? What are the best ways that they can lend their voice, lend their resources, lend themselves to achieving ambitious goals in 2015, to making 2015 a banner year for humanity? Lori, I'll stay with you. How can people get involved in your work? How can they help you in your effort?
Sure. So 2 ways. If you are with an organization that wants to be part of this global mobilization, please go to action2015.org and sign up. It's really easy. You just sign the pledge, and your organization can be involved. You'll be directed to the right country, and we will tell you how to get involved with the sort of groups that are organizing in each country. From the One perspective, One today has a global pledge up that people can take about how they want to commit to the world, commit to getting involved this year, and demand better of our leaders. So go to one.org, take the pledge, and share it with your friends and get involved. And if you need, more inspiration than watching the Twitter feeds today than what's out there around the world, watch the video that's up on the Action 2015 YouTube channel. You can watch it in Spanish, German, French, Portuguese, Hindi, Arabic, and/or English. Take your pick. But it's a fantastic video that sort of gives you the inspiration to know why we need to do this now. And we look forward to working with lots of people throughout the year to make this a really great success.
Well, I need no more inspiration than a Twitter hashtag, which often bring me to tears. But that's probably because I live on Twitter. But Rob, next question is yours. How can people get involved?
Yeah, I think that Action 2015 is really all about sort of the old cliche because it's true, probably, at least in my opinion. It's about think globally and act locally. The Action 2015 is a global movement, organizations from all over the world, but it's all about the organizations that are part of Action 2015 making their voices heard through a large movement like Action 2015, taking action locally. So anybody that's out there that wants to be involved, yes, check out what's happening at the United Nations. Check out what's happening, what we're putting out at the United Nations Foundation at unfoundation.org. See how we're connecting, local to global. But then go out, find out, whatever your issue is, whatever you care about, go out and find the local organization that's working on that issue. It's out there. There are people working on this, under, organizations, no matter where you are. If you're sitting in New York like I am, or if you're sitting in, Lagos, Nigeria, or Mumbai, India, or wherever, people are working on the issues that you care about. Find them, join together, make it happen.
And Marie, I'm going to give you the last word. You're the center of this all. You're the beating heart of this coalition. How can people get involved with your work and with you, and what are the best avenues for action?
So today, right now, people don't need to move from their seat. Just with your computer, go online, www.action2015.org. Follow us on Twitter at Action2015. Be loud, use the hashtag Action2015. And then we're going to gather all around the year. As Lori and Rob have said, we've got thousands of organizations around the world. There's one where you live. Join us online. You'll find the organization near you through which you can engage.
Well, thank you all. Listen, I think 2015 has the potential to be a world historic year for humanity, on par with 1948, 1968, 1989, and 2000. So 2015 could be one of those years that just changes the course of history, at least as is experienced by most of the 7 billion people who live on this planet. So Lori, Marie, Rob, thank you all for this conversation and for your work. And everyone else out there, follow along all day on hashtag Action2015. And for the rest of the year, you can follow all of the work of all these fabulous organizations. Thank you all, and we'll keep this social media train rolling on to the next event. So thank you guys, and bye-bye.
Thank
you, Mark. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.